What is feminism to me? What does it mean to me?
What does it mean to you, and how is it part of your life?
How is it part of my life? In terms of what it means, I think it means many things. It's it's kind of a complex meaning. It means it's a sort of position from which I can view the world. So a position of awareness of the way the gender relationships are structured in our society, and then because I've lived in two different societies. So one is in the context of the Yugoslav sphere, and I grew up in Bosnia, very patriarchal, quite macho, and not just macho of the men, but much of the women as well. So the kind of machoist culture, and I think coming then from that society, I was very aware my position as a woman, like how constructed I was and restricted I was of what I could do. And then going to London, it was quite liberating in a way, but through then, in a way, growing up there in kind of adult life, I've become aware of the way the sort of neoliberalist, capitalist structuring affects the position of the women particularly, but also restricts all our positions and structures them. So I kind of see feminism very much, for me, it's very much entwined with a kind of with being very conscious, not just of the gender, but of the kind of, it's like a wider structuring of how we are, of social relations. And then being feminist means taking an active political, not just an interest, but a decision to engage with certain topics. So for example, me being an artist, I've engaged a lot of my last 3 projects, and I haven't really thought, it's not like I planned it, but all my last 3 projects were working with women. So, and you know, because of either the last project was very much around because of the marginalization of their histories, but the previous projects were also a kind of curiosity about how do we construct our relationship to body, how the bodies are controlled, and through various image regimes almost. So I feel like, you know, so that kind of also how it comes into my life. I think that's sort of part of the answer. It's part of my thinking about how do I relate to the world. It's part of my thinking about how do I produce the works of art, or the relations, the social relations in either life or art. I don't make a big distinction. I mean, there is a distinction, but I think it's sort of very, very interwoven together.
I would also like to ask you, in that part you said feminism goes also through your art production, and are you connecting also your work as an artist and are you socializing it also in some environment where you're engaged, where you live? What kind of connections you're taking from society, in a society, giving through your work and also through the position, like you said, like a feminist position, point of view?
I mean, I want to kind of also say that I think this feministic point of view, I don't have a kind of, it's not a fixed position, it's not a position that's like fixed, and from that position I do the world, but so it's a process of thinking through the position of what it means. And in that process, I involve others, not necessarily in the making of the work in terms of, like, for example, the women that I photograph, or the women that I interview, the women that I, in a way, represent in my work. I involve them in the process of research and thinking. This is like physical involvement, but of course, like, for example, the last project, I actually spent about 2 years going to Berlin and back. So it was kind of a process of going backwards and forwards and meeting people several times in building a kind of relationships. I mean, they're not relationships I can sustain, but you know, I felt like it was important for me that I'm not just meeting someone on the one occasion. So there is a kind of continuity, there's a kind of commitment.
And research.
And in that research, yeah. And so I think in that sense, I give, at least I'm deeply interested in their stories. And I'm not sure, I mean, I can't speak for them, but I know that the kind of interesting spaces opens up where I learn a lot from them. It's not this position of like, oh, I'll come and, you know, I'll learn their stories and I'll take and make art. I just feel like, you know, they've taught me a lot about independence and emancipation. And they have a Udruženje Žena, a women's collective in these community centers, which is so much about solidarity. They might not make their position clear, it's like, this is my feminist position. But that point of solidarity, I felt, was really inspiring for me. So, and I guess these kind of things sometimes are not apparent in the art exhibitions, and it's about, I mean, I'm constantly thinking through how the transparency and how people involving themselves in the process. I mean, in the exhibition here, people can actually engage with the work in a physical sense as well, so they can become a kind of researchers themselves, but also workers. They have to work in the artwork. So there's different, it's almost like I'm interested in creating different positions, also for myself, but also for the viewer, in order to activate these spaces of thinking and engaging, rather than a kind of fixed place from which I say, oh, this is how I see the world, I'm an artist, and therefore this is the, you know, this is what I'm interested in. Yeah, so I hope that's right. Now I think that visibility is important, but it's also, it's like, it's the politics of visibility and how that visibility is given, because there's always a kind of relationship of power and empowerment and disempowerment. So I'm really aware of that in terms of an exhibition space. How, because here we're really talking about regimes of images and text. I mean, within that there's a content of the stories and histories, but I also always interested in the structural positioning of all these objects as an artist, because I think there is a politics embedded in all of that. So it's how to really tackle that politics of visual material and visibility together.
We are very visible society also, and that's why it's very important on which way you show something and whose position you're taking with
yes,
it.
Yes, yeah. And how can I make my position also transparent? And so in a way, like for me, this kind of text work was not just making my position, in a way I was, because that's my voice in here, but it was also making that image questionable. You know, it's making you go, oh, well, I don't see, you know, it's like saying, I see that in that image.
Yeah, putting contradictions together so they can make their own work in asking and going through.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of, because I think and I feel that that's very strong here in not just in the Balkans, but I think in Britain perhaps there is a bit of a, in the kind of language of documentary image, it's been kind of questioned and stuff, but sometimes I find when I go back to Yugoslavia there's immediate like document, you know, there's a kind of almost a fetishization of the document as the truth. And if you mess with it, but I think that comes across also in anthropology and sociology, those sciences especially, that if you mess with either history or the image or the document, it's like a sacrilege. It's like you can't mess with that. So for me it was really interesting, like in a way it's like what boundaries can I push here without really, like what boundaries of image, and how to actually create still a space for these stories, so not to undermine the material aspect of these stories, because it's important, and at the same time I want to be free, whatever that means. I want to be free to actually respond how I want to respond, make that tree small or big, or you know, or the film. I think the film for me was the real space in which I kind of was able to start also creating another space within the space and restaging things and restaging histories and stories, but in my studio in London. So it was like, yeah, so it was a lot of struggle, this project. You know, it's not like, oh yeah. It was like, I felt for a year that I was failing. I felt for a whole year I was failing, I was a crack artist, you know what I mean, like a whole year, or a year and a half. It was very like, it was very insecure, because I just thought, I know what I don't want to do, but I don't know what I want to do. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a
but that
shift.
came through a crystallization of putting together things, and also it's it's experience, but it's also research.
Yes, yes. It's complete. And
it's like in a reading. You can read, and it takes you. You don't take it.
There is a moment you feel like you hand yourself over. And it really was, and then it was really fast. Like this whole thing just went, ooh, like really kind of fell into place in like 2 months or 3 months, like ooh. And like a year and a half, I was like, and doing, and you don't know how that's going to work, and then you go back to Berlin, and then like, oh, you know, it's like. And the reason I think now also I understand why I felt like that, because I think because I operate because it's not because of me only. I think I realized more a bit about the art world. This is not being recorded. Are you recording all of this? No.
Yeah, we are recording.
Oh, okay.